tell us about this breach that you were involved in, Mr. Sims.
Stay out of my breeches.
I was wondering how long it would take, We can't have that episode without it.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
How's it going today, Donna?
It's going better for me than I think for you.
Yeah, we won't go there. Just don't start out with that.
Let's just distract you with some fun talking about HIPAA stuff and data breaches. This is what everybody else does with when they are frustrated. They go work on HIPAA.
Is that what they do? I thought the HIPAA caused the frustration.
I think it does.
Oh, so are you still hungover from last week's episode 52, the big year party?
The birthday party. It was awesome. I am thrilled to get started on our second year of us making stuff up and talking about it.
Making stuff up? We don't make stuff up.
Well, we come up with ideas of things to talk about based on stuff that's happening around us. Mm-hmm. It's not like there's actually a real long-term plan. It's, what do you want to talk about this week?
There's a long-term plan. We're going to conquer the world, remember?
Oh, yeah. That's yours. So, you're the idea guy. We talked about that last week.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. I come up with all the things for you to do. You do a good job, too.
Aw. I don't believe you, but thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So this week,
talk some more about some audit stuff.
Well, we talk about the audits, and everybody's like, "Oh, audits!" I can't believe how many people are suddenly listening to what we got to talk about and calling us because these audits have come out. And really, statistically, you're more likely to be involved in a breach probably than in one of these audits. But that's not been the big topic. So it made me start thinking about, do people really understand how to calculate these costs, what a breach actually costs us? And, there's a lot of intangibles and there's a lot of estimates and all those kind of things. But thinking it through about what your risk really is from a cost standpoint, if you don't protect this data and at least have, what was it that somebody said? Somebody new to HIPAA said, okay, so it's my understanding that if we're at least trying, it's better than when you're not. Yes.
Yeah, it would be.
You get credit for trying. There's an A for effort.
As long as it's a reasonable and appropriate amount of effort.
That's right. So,
yeah, because people look at the numbers. We've mentioned this before. They look at like the sexy numbers, which is
sexy.
So and so was fined, or so and so came up with a corrective action plan of $500,000 or whatever, and they look at that number. You and I look at it and go, "Oh yeah, it's going to be a lot more than that."
Yeah, I mean the fine is just indicative of how OCR viewed it. It doesn't include any of the other costs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean in some cases, not all the time, but in some cases, everything around the breach actually could cost you more than the fine that gets reported.
Oh yeah, I mean. The fine that gets the big news, the one, if it's $3.1 million, that's probably a drop in the bucket to the total cost.
Yeah, scary.
Yeah. So,
but you have developed a plan to calculate those breach costs.
Oh, no. I'm saying, put some numbers to this stuff. Think about it. No, I can't do that math, even though I have a minor in mathematics. I can't make that kind of stuff up very well. But I can give you, I found some really cool websites that have these calculators. And of course, they're selling insurance and all this other stuff. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. But they're not totally out of whack with the things that you need to think about and what the cost could be.
Okay.
So I made a list of things, of cost line items that I think you should worry about. And we could talk about, and then ran some numbers through those calculators. And, as soon as I showed David the calculator people, he went nuts entering numbers like crazy before I could even explain what I wanted to do with it. Numbers.
Don't give me nothing to interact with and then tell me not to interact with it.
There's so many things that could go with that. So, so first of all, let's go through the cost line items of the things that really should be considered. And then these calculators, the ones that really go into the detail of all the stuff, they are really cumbersome, so we're just going to look at numbers from some of the shorter ones as far as the calculators go. But all of these different line items are just touching the surface. Once you get into a really complex breach, there's other things. So first, you have to do the investigation. So sometimes that means there's law enforcement, which doesn't actually directly cost you anything to call the FBI, or even worse, have the FBI call you, because that's happened. But, these forensics investigations, I mean, to do it all over again, I would probably go into computer forensics today. I love the CSI cyber stuff, man. But you don't get that for free. And I personally can only do, I can scratch the surface of figuring it out. I don't know about you. Do you feel you could even figure it all out in an investigation?
No, I think that's such a different level of IT that, you really have to specialize in it. It's not something to where you can kind of have some, a little bit of knowledge in it and then do good at it. I mean, you really have to dive deep into some of the things that most IT people never access.
Right, and that says a lot. If it's this, you have to go deeper than the stuff that you and I do, and people do mention that you and I can go nerdy and talk over people's heads. So just dealing with the people, so you can imagine those people are not inexpensive to hire.
Mm-hmm.
And finding the right one is complicated. So, I mean, one of the things that, we always worry about is, how do you identify all those people? And that's why we encourage people to work with companies like, ID experts. We often send people to, but there's certainly other companies out there, but they are able to bring in all of these kind of resources that we're going to talk about. Investigation is one of them. Forensics. Dum, da-dum, dum. I like that one. Sherlock Holmes.
And we have people ask us to do forensics often.
Yeah, I know. People call us. I'm like, no, I can't do that.
Well, ours usually come in the form of, can you tell me how I got that virus?
No, really?
It's like, I could tell you, but I would have to get somebody to come in and do some forensics. And do you really want to pay $5,000 to find out how you got a virus?
Yeah. Do you really want me to find what porn site you went to? That's, people have no idea how many times they click on things that they really shouldn't. So you've got that cost, and you got to figure out what happened so that you even know how to fix the problem. And the problem could be horrible. It could be simple, but remediation is fixing the problem. So you're going to have some cost to that. And, there's people that have we've heard cases of breaches that occurred because, your firewall was so far out of date. I mean, we've gone in before and found firewalls where, this is the thing that's supposed to be your outer perimeter, and it's like 7 releases behind on the firmware and doesn't handle your traffic, and you're kind of hitting all of its limits. So now I've got to replace all of that. Those are not cheap. But again, that's part of your cost line items. So the investigation and remediation, those two alone can be expensive, but in a lot of ways, the remediation could be avoided. The things you have to do in the remediation, if those were done up front, you wouldn't be doing all this other stuff. That's all I'm saying. There's a great possibility, like the firewall example.
Right.
And then there's notifications.
Yeah, these I think are surprisingly more expensive than what people realize.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, we got to notify the patients. We got to send out letters. Okay, well, how are you going to identify those 20,000 patients? Make sure you have the most recent information, or at least something that you can mail, and then actually produce and mail the notification letters to all of the parties. And then you have to you're responsible for, you have the, and I can't recall exactly what the law uses as a term, but you're responsible for proving you've done everything you can to try to find every one of the patients involved, even if it's somebody from 3 or 4 years ago and you keep getting return mail and you can't find them. You have to document how hard you tried to find them. So that's part of notification. And then, of course, crafting the letter, part of a notification. So that's not cheap.
Yeah. I think I'd read somewhere before that the cost was, I think I've read a few different ones, but basically you're somewhere around $150 or so per record, so per person, to just do the notification.
Really? And I bet that doesn't count the things that you're supposed to include that most people include, which is the identity theft and theft and repair, credit monitoring, all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So you have to be willing to pay for that for all those 20,000 patients or even 1,000 patients. That's a lot of money. And that's another line item.
So you just put it on Facebook and you don't have to send it to anybody. Just say, if you were a patient, you were breached. This is your notification.
Please share it with everybody you know.
Oh, they will.
And they will. It's crazy. So we hit the investigation, the remediation, the notification, the things you have to include in the notification. Then we get down to the regulatory fines that, as you recently said, they are the sexy ones. I don't know. It makes the sexy headlines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So those regulatory fines, and another thing there is people don't realize the FCC is doing some of this stuff too now. You know, we've talked about it before, but a lot of people don't realize. And I encourage people to reconsider those stamps on their website that say guaranteed HIPAA compliant, because that could be considered fraud. But anyway,
they were at that moment in time for a split second HIPAA compliant
and
certified.
Yeah. So, they're getting involved as well as OCR. And then, of course, there's state fines now. The states are starting to have things. And so you have to start to understand all the different states. So if you're somebody like a payer and you had something breached that covered multiple states, boom. Or a business associate. Lots of business associates cover multiple states. Mm-hmm. And you should see their eyes get big when we say, well, you've got to somehow figure out how you're going to keep up with all the rules for every state. What?
Right.
So the regulatory fines beyond the sexy ones, and also those are relative, because we talked before about how they fine them enough to get their point across. So if it's somebody that if you find them $7,000, it was really hard for them, like me, I would freak right on out. Even that little amount would be a substantial effect on my cash flow, right? But if my company needed, if that was nothing and they just wrote a check, then they wouldn't care. So next it's, $750,000. Well, now I'm going to get your attention, or $70,000 that, companies, the smaller companies are going to get the smaller, you would hope, because if they don't get the smaller fines, that means it was really bad.
Yeah.
So, it is relative. So even though $7,000 might not be sexy, it would be very sexy to a small company. So not sexy, really.
It would hurt.
Well, we're not going to go into what that would mean. So, we're using the wrong.
You're off the chain today.
I'm trying to help you out, bro.
I'm reeling you in.
Yeah.
I'm reeling you in.
We're just using the wrong analogy here. We need to get away from sexy. So, anyway.
Don't bring it back.
Let's move on from regulatory fines. Don't bring it back. JT, we love you. Anyway, disruptions in normal business operations. So I can assure you, if you're in the middle of having an investigation, a forensic investigation of what's going on in your computer systems, there will be disruptions in your normal business operations.
Mm-hmm. A lot.
Yes. And even if, all of your workforce members may not be affected by it, your normal business operations that are handled by your management level, your IT groups, everybody that interfaces with any kind of the technology part of your business, if it involves a cyber breach, they're going to be distracted from doing their normal jobs. So you've got a significant disruption that will occur, and you don't know how long that will last. Because, I know that when we go in just to do, you think about the disruption that occurs just because you're putting in a new computer on somebody's desk. In a group environment where today everybody's in these open offices and stuff. So you're putting in that computer, everybody's aware of it. And that's just that. So you can imagine what a stressful breach would do in your business operations, which everybody knows. Anybody that's ever, it's like business owners, once you've reached that point where everything becomes math and there's like a power outage, say, and no one can work. Everybody's just kind of sitting around talking. You do the math of every person that's sitting there and what it's costing to pay them to sit there talking. It's expensive. So you've got that needs to go on the list. And then you've got lost business. And I think people don't look at this. They're like, well, my clients aren't going to leave me or my patients aren't going to leave me. But it's more than that. It's people that couldn't find you, couldn't get in touch with you, or now they're not even going to talk to you and get to know you. So maybe you don't get new business, you're losing new business as well as losing current business. Because when the word gets out on these big ones, because remember, you have to have an announcement to the media. So there's another area we'll get to in just a second that you got to be involved. So everybody has to know. You have to like call people up and say, hey, look, I screwed up. I always equate it to every day when you're driving to work and you're speeding, when you get to work, you have to call the police and tell them all the places that you were speeding and ask them to send you a ticket.
Yeah, that won't happen.
I know, but that's kind of what it's like, is you got to tell everybody. And then you have all these variety of class action lawsuits. And, it's interesting, all of the different types of these lawsuits that occur. So we know about ones that you would expect, patients that have private information disclosed, they will file a lawsuit, even in cases where, OCR says, well, nothing really happened that we believe you could have done any more about. We thought, we think you did everything you were supposed to do, but the patients can still come in and have a lawsuit. So even if you don't have a lot of regulatory fines, you could have all these other costs and a lawsuit to deal with, which, we're real excited. Everybody loves a lawsuit. No, just the lawyers. So, and then finally, the legal and consulting fees to manage all of this. So, you let's say you hire a mailing company and you hire the forensics and somebody's still going to have handle all the legal ramblings that have to take place. And then you're going to need somebody like me or you to help out managing all of the stuff. And then you got to have a PR person because Lord knows you don't want all your employees talking to the press. I don't know. It would be interesting to see them put a camera and a microphone in your face and say, tell us about this breach that you were involved in, Mr. Sims.
Stay out of my breeches.
I was wondering how long it would take, We can't have that episode without it.
That's just for the, new listeners. Not everybody goes back and listens to all of them.
Yeah. Breaches. Yeah.
We have to call Ray up and get him to do it again.
Yeah. We'll bring him in and we'll have another entertaining episode on worrying about your breaches. So got any others you want to add there, Dave? David?
Nope.
I missed some.
I know it's so much trouble putting an ID on the end of it.
I know. My brother's name is David, and in the family, we're allowed to call him Dave, but he doesn't let other people do that. And he's very clear with other people. Only my family can call me Dave. So I understand it, but he's well up into his 40s at this point. And so all of his life I've been saying it. So there you go.
All right. So I just make your family and you can get by with it.
There you go. We're done, folks. I can say it. You can't. I've gotten the approval to make that mistake now. All right. So any others you want to add?
No, you are doing fine. I'm following you.
Yeah. I'm helping you get through your bad day. Bad week.
Yeah. Just don't become part of it.
Well, that was my goal. So then we took some of these calculators, and we'll put all of these, of course, on the website with some links so you can try them yourself for those of you that need to get in there and enter numbers like David. So,
well, yeah, I want to know.
So I'm going to let you, I did some numbers and put some stuff in there. So I'm going to let you talk about the numbers there, David, because you enjoyed that part of how some of these numbers worked out.
I don't have that stuff pulled in front of me anymore.
Oh, see? Look, it's in the show notes.
Oh, hold on. You got me jumping all around and stuff.
Jumping all around. I'm working straight down the same list you're supposed to be looking at.
You ask too much. So,
so organized.
I know.
All right. So
the numbers based on the stuff I looked at. I guess this is kind of going off of like if you had 1,000 patients, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we'll start out with one. Let's say you have a little over 2,000 patients. I don't know what the average. Do you know what the average is like for a small office? What they typically would have in a breach?
I don't know that there is such a thing as an average.
Okay.
I think it's all over the board. But I was trying to do, a substantial number, but not the insane numbers. Not the sexy numbers, but realistic ones.
Yeah, that way you won't have because some, when you come up and go, yes, there was 4 million records stolen. Well, probably most of the people that listen to this are not going to even have that many records. So we want to bring it back down to a level that kind of makes it a little more applicable.
Right.
So if we look at like 2,350 patients, and let's say the data is stored in a centralized location, there's no fraud involved because these are all the questions that asked you in that little calculator. And then there's no PCI compliance issues, no lawsuits have been filed. So all those things have been moved out of the way. You're looking at, for just the cost of investigation, you're looking at over $130,000 just for the investigation. And then the crisis management and notification costs are going to be just over $48,000. Sanctions and fines are listed at $985,000, which brings a total cost of $1.1 million. Or $495 per patient record.
Right.
And then the interesting thing is if you bring it down, like if we come from the 2,350 patients down to just 1,000 patients, which is not a lot really, the numbers don't really go down that much either. You would think, okay, if you went from over 2,000 down to 1,000 patients, then the cost should be half as much. But it doesn't work out that way. Actually, it only comes down about $150,000. So you're still going to pay just a little north of $1 million for that.
Well, it's the forensics are they're not dramatically different, between 1,000 patients and even 100,000 patients. The forensics are basically the same.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but the cost per record goes way up.
I know, really, because the forensics are basically the same.
Yeah.
So that's the big difference, or the reason there's not a big difference, rather, is that the forensics don't really change no matter how many records are affected.
So you need to make sure you call your insurance agent. Make sure you have at least $1 million coverage just for a breach.
At least. Does your E&O cover these kind of solutions? Because that's one of the things that I did look up is there's cases where the insurers are saying, you know what, your E&O policy does not include what's happening to you right now. And so it was...
not what you want to hear.
I know, really. It's like, oh, I got insurance. No, you don't. So this is one that I hadn't really... Because it's so beyond an actual breach that, so this is beyond what I would normally be tracking until I found this one. And so it's Portal Healthcare Solutions, so we can go look up the details. But So they had a business associate, that's important to note, who
Your weakest link.
Yeah. And the business associate made a error, we'll go with, that exposed the patient records on the internet for 2,300 patients. And, that goes back to website security, which we just talked about. But so that was back in 2012. And Portal Healthcare Solution, they've dealt with all that list we just talked about. But then they get this class action lawsuit filed by the patients, which, we said happens. And so they turn to their insurance, Travelers, and Travelers goes, nope, we don't have to cover this representing you in this lawsuit. It's not covered. And they had a general liability policy. So, just a standard policy. This is something that we've talked about before. You better know what's covered and what you're expected to do to get that coverage. Because the insurers are saying, I hadn't planned on this in my risk profile.
I don't know about you, but it actually took me 4 or 5 insurance agencies before somebody would finally even talk to me when I mentioned HIPAA.
They said,
like, oh, wait a minute. No,
move along.
We're not going to cover that.
And we have, one that covered us for HIPAA as an IT company that worked in healthcare, but then they wouldn't cover us when we wanted to, focus on being a HIPAA consulting firm. They're like, okay, no, you're getting deeper into it. We're not covering that. Thanks, but no thanks. And we had to go on to somebody else where it was becoming a major part of our business. So it is something that you have to spend some time on, making sure that you have the right thing. And their policy, what was the phrase? The section of the policy provided cover if Portal was obliged to pay damages as a result of, quote, electronic publication of material resulting in, quote, unreasonable publicity to a person's private life, unquote. So those were the two: electronic publication of material resulting in unreasonable publicity to a person's private life is in their policy. And Travelers is saying that doesn't deal with your business associate opening you up to Google searches. That's not what that's for. And it's gone now all the way to a federal appeals court that says, they got to pay it, but, it's going to keep going. Who knows how that's going to go. And in the meantime, the provider is still dealing with paying for all this because it's likely the business associate there was no indemnification to make them pay for it as long ago as it was. Now, yeah, you better be reading your BAAs. Gonna be asking more questions about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just finished a review of, trying to finalize our new updated business associate due diligence. Because we have to ask questions about, do you have cyber coverage? So there's a lot of things there. Mm-hmm. So that's probably not part of the original calculation that got us over $1 million. There's another $1 million involved in that one right there.
I know.
And it's 2,300 patients. So the calculator said that's, roughly a little less than 1.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to add on all of this. And this has been going on since 2012, 2013 is when the breach occurred. So, cha-ching. And then, of course, ransomware attacks. The calculator wouldn't include you paying extortion to get your data back, which we've talked about. And apparently, I did not know how many people are having to pay. And, as much as we talk about it, we're fortunate that we haven't had to deal with that too much, knock on simulated wood. But the numbers, the FBI figures suggest, this was a quote from an article, and in the first 3 months of 2016, so just the first quarter, $209 million was paid on these ransomware attacks.
Mm.
And all of 2015 was $25 million.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm like,
so they are on track.
Yeah. Well,
Golly.
a lot of that's, they figured out healthcare, and they figured out a lot of these companies have gaping holes, and ransomware is a thing that they can get in there. And so, wow is all I can say. And so clearly people are paying a lot of money. And while ransomware isn't necessarily a breach, and there were several people that ask about that when we've talked about ransomware before, if data never leaves, it just gets encrypted and you can't get to it, then it's not necessarily a breach of, an unauthorized user disclosure because nobody took it. They just hid it from you in your own computer.
It's certainly a security incident.
Right.
There.
So, it's a security incident, and you have to do the investigation.
Right. That's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
You still got to pay for all the other stuff.
And don't you love the word that you have to do? You have to prove there was no exfiltration.
Yeah.
Exfiltration. Exfiltration. That's one of your kind of words.
Yeah, I like those words.
So, infiltration resulted in exfiltration.
A lot of filtrations going on.
So,
of your money.
Yeah, really. So again, you would have to pay for the forensics cost, even though you wouldn't necessarily. You'd have the crisis management because, it's in the news when you can't function, and you've got the investigation. And, so it's possible that it's not a true breach of PHI, but it certainly affects your ability to remember CIA. The A is availability. So that's all I'm saying about that. And then this other one that I'm sure wasn't included, another kind of lawsuit, I found this one quite interesting. And I'm going to start watching this one because there's a class action lawsuit that cancer patients have filed against a long list of people. It starts with Facebook. They're filing it against Facebook because it has to do with Facebook ads they're seeing. But then it lists all these big names in cancer treatment, including the American Cancer Society, the American Society of Oncology, and, the Cleveland Clinic, MD Anderson Cancer Center, which is, the University of Texas, one of the biggest names in cancer research. And this suit claims that there's been a privacy violation, a HIPAA violation, along with some other things they pulled out you throw everything at it. But that said, when they would go to these websites and then they would go to Facebook, all of a sudden they would start seeing cancer ads about cancer treatment and drugs and those kind of things. Well, the only way Facebook knew to give it to them was because they went to those websites. Well, if I'm a patient and that happens, you've basically given up the fact that I'm your patient. So technically they're right. If this is what's happening, you could follow that logic, we'll say. And I'm sure OCR has to be involved at some point in making that case evaluation. But this is a whole different kind of lawsuit that says, you're using the Facebook tool to get money from Facebook for ads, right? And that's just a little API, and people use it all the time. It's a very nice way to make money and to serve ads that bring people back to you through Facebook. But apparently somebody in marketing or technology set that puppy up, and nobody thought about what it really meant. Nobody ran that one by a compliance officer. Let me understand. It's one of those cases where when we talk about have a little bit of understanding of technology just to know to ask the questions, or have someone that you could call and say, I need a third party to tell me if I need to ask any more questions. And that's certainly one you want to ask, because if we're using this Facebook thing that's really nifty, but we're passing it information, and remember, one of the items that's considered PHI is an IP address.
Yep, it is. So
there you have it. So there's all the cost I came up with to worry about. And there's really a lot more, but I got overwhelmed at this point, and we had to cut out a whole bunch of stuff because I got on a roll. And David looked at the notes. He's like, that's like 2 or 3 hours. So,
yeah, how long are we going to talk here?
Yeah, we've talked long enough to bother these people. We appreciate that they are paying attention. So, but you gotta put this into your plan and your risk analysis, or at least, understanding how your business could respond, because those numbers, it doesn't matter the size of your practice or the size of your business if you expose 1,000 patients. Portal Healthcare Solutions, 2,300 patients. Lots and lots of businesses and practices are going to have that many patients.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, easily.
So, again, we're trying to use these numbers as relative, and it's certainly happening a great deal. So, there you have it.
So, you often hear the phrase, especially around healthcare or somebody's health, that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this, it's more like, an ounce of prevention is a couple tons.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
I mean, because really, and we've not really covered the cost or talked about the cost of prevention versus dealing with this stuff. But really, the cost to prevent these things and address them before they become problems is, in relation to the fines and costs, are very low.
Oh, comparatively, yes.
Yeah. I mean, so it's not, I mean, the thing is, it's almost like an insurance thing, because you don't know if you're going to have a breach. You don't know if you're going to have an audit or anything. So that's kind of the mindset some people have, is like, well, should I take a chance? Should I spend the money to do these things because maybe it won't happen to me? Which I think is a very flawed mindset, because you should be doing those things anyway, not looking at, should I do it so that I don't get fined? You should be doing it so that you protect your business and your patients and, customers or whatever the case might be. That's why you should be doing it, because it's the right thing to do. But, if you've got to pay, I don't know, let's just throw a number out there. If you had to pay $10,000 a year to save yourself from spending $1 million on a breach, that's a pretty good investment.
Well, from shutting down it can shut down your business. So, I mean, you're right when you compare those two and getting people to understand that it is the right thing to do, because when you look at these numbers, it ends up being a very small amount that actually involves those fines and sanctions and stuff. The fines and sanctions, yeah. So you look at it and you take on that 1,000 patients. So we're at $1 million, and we take out 850,000 is what it put in there for sanctions and fines. That's still, $150,000. So spend $75,000 on your infrastructure. Get it set up over a period of 2 or 3 years, and you're still sitting pretty.
Right.
So that's all I have to say about that.
Are you sure?
Probably not, but.
And I think too, as we started this, we talked about people focusing on the audits when that's such a small amount of the problem, where they should be focusing on, the breaches and what you're going to do to prevent that, not how to try to get around an audit.
Yeah.
But I think it's the same thing kind of goes here, where you don't want to focus on what are you going to do when a breach happens. You don't want to focus on that more so than you focus on how can we just prevent it completely to begin with.
Yeah, I saw a headline this week somewhere, an article that said healthcare is focused more on compliance than data protection, something like that. And that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a better way to put it. It's not about compliance.
It's about patient care.
I know. We say it all the time. And it really is. When you shift that mindset from let's don't talk about compliance, let's focus on the privacy and security of the data to protect our practice and our patients and all that. When you do that, magically all the rest of it falls in line.
And it doesn't matter what kind of business it is, really. I mean, we're in the world now that, just like removing the sanctions and fines, all that other cost would apply to most any business today, because most states require you to notify people of data breaches. And you still have to investigate it the same way.
Yeah, and it's just going to get worse.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't think the next president's going to make HIPAA go away. If you're waiting on that, you might as well just forget it.
Well, and it's not. I mean, look at the difference in the ransomware in the first quarter.
$25 million all of last year, and it's already $209 million just the first quarter.
I mean, that's ridiculous. So all we're doing is encouraging criminals.
And people, it's funny because when something like that happens, or I get a client, sometimes they'll get a virus or whatever, and they'll say, "Why do people do this? Do they not have anything better to do?" I'm like, "Do you know how much money they make?"
I know.
doing this kind of stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah, you think you're the only one. You don't realize that there's easily 150,000 people like you that fell for it.
Yeah.
If not a million, I mean, it depends on what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All it takes is one big fish. We can get a ton of little fish, and then eventually you'll get a big one that's been chasing the little ones.
Mm-hmm. All righty. So now everybody has a lot to worry about.
That's right. A data breach costs a lot.
So it's better to prevent it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's our episode for today. And again, my name's David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs and Donna Grindle of Cardin Compliance. You can find us online. We're everywhere. Head on over to iTunes if you like today's show and give us a review. We'd appreciate that. Share us out on social media. I'd like to thank everyone who is already doing those things because we are seeing the fruits of your labor. Our numbers for downloads and listens are going up a lot here lately. And I know it's because a lot of you are sharing it because we get notifications that you're sharing it. So we really appreciate it when you do that. You can also find us on the web at helpmewithhipaa.com. And you can leave a question right there on the front page if you want to. And we may even feature that on a future podcast episode. So remember that HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.